I drove past my son-in-law's place and saw my wife's Lexus at the gate, the same car that should have been in our garage. What I heard next shattered 25 years of marriage in seconds. I slowed past my son-in-law's house and froze. Helen Reed's silver Lexus sat bold as daylight at the gate. That car was supposed to be in our garage. A knot tightened in my chest. Something's off. I moved quietly toward a side window, careful not to be seen. Voices slipped through the gap in the curtains. Words that would upend my life. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned, Helen said, her voice smooth as glass and twice as cold. 5 minutes earlier, I called my daughter, Sophie Reed, to surprise her with dinner. Sorry, Dad, I'm not home, but Mark is there working on case files. Yet here was Helen's car, parked like it belonged. I killed the engine, crept to the window, and looked inside. My wife of 25 years lounged on Sophie's couch as if she owned it. Mark Turner leaned against a bookshelf, wearing that smug, courtroom smile. The timing's perfect, Mark said in his crisp lawyer tone. File in June, irreconcilable differences. Under new Iowa statutes, Helen walks with half of everything acquired during the marriage, plus lifetime support. Helen laughed, a sound I used to love. The construction company's worth $12 million. Ad rentals, the lake place, investments were pushing 20. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and hit record. The best part is his trusting nature, Mark went on. Thomas has no clue we've been logging his assets for months. Bank statements, deeds, valuations. It's all copied. He nodded at a manila folder on the coffee table. He practically handed us the keys to his kingdom. Helen inspected her nails. 2 years of playing the devoted wife, listening to his boring job stories, nodding about payroll. He actually believes I love him. A twig snapped under my shoe. Both heads snapped toward the window. I pressed flat to the brick, heart pounding. Did you hear that? Helen whispered. Probably the neighbor's cat, Mark said after a beat. Relax. Thomas wouldn't spot a setup if it had a neon sign. By September, you'll be divorced, rich, and free. I stayed hidden until their voices settled again, letting my phone catch every poisonous word. When I finally slid back into my car, my world had tilted. While I'd been grinding 16-hour days to build our future, they'd been drafting its demolition. That folder, it was the blueprint of my ruin. He actually believes I love him. The worst part? Half an hour ago, I did. The front door opened. Helen stepped out, designer bag swinging, with Mark straightening his tie. They didn't expect to see me sitting there. Thomas, Helen's voice pitched up. What are you doing here? I forced a steady smile. Site inspection nearby. I lied, getting out of the car. Thought I'd check in on Sophie. Mark edged closer to Helen, eyes scanning my face. She's not here, Helen said quickly. We were helping Mark sort a client's documents. Oh, I kept it light. I thought you were at work till 6. Didn't you mention the Henderson proposal this morning? A flicker of panic crossed her face. Io left early. Headache. Sorry to hear that. I turned to Mark with fake friendliness. Working on an interesting case? Asset division, he said without thinking, then caught himself. For a divorce client. Very complex finances. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't aimed at me. Helen's eyes flicked between us. How long have you been here, Thomas? Just pulled up. Why? No reason. She smiled, a painted-on mask. You seem tense. Is everything okay? The woman plotting my ruin was asking about my well-being. I almost laughed. Long day. You know how it is. I nodded at Mark. Don't let me interrupt. We were just finishing up, Mark said, resting his hand on Helen's lower back. Too comfortable, too intimate. I checked my phone, making sure they noticed. Mark's gaze lingered on the screen. I should head home. Dinner won't cook itself. I'll be along shortly, Helen said, her laugh thin. I paused with my car door open. Oh, Helen, Dr. Patterson's office called. Something about rescheduling your physical. Conflict with your work hours. Her face froze for a split second before she smoothed it over. Must be a mix-up. I'll call them later. I slid behind the wheel. See you both later. In my rear-view mirror, they stood frozen until I turned the corner, then leaned in close, whispering urgently. The three-way dance of lies was complete. They suspected I might have overheard. I knew they were plotting to gut me, and we were all pretending nothing was wrong. Helen would come home later with polished excuses for her early exit from work and her presence at Mark's. But she didn't know about the recording on my phone. 43 minutes of crystal-clear audio that would destroy them. The shock was gone now, replaced by something colder. They thought I was playing checkers while they played chess. They were about to learn they'd misread the board entirely. The drive home blurred past. My Honda rolled into the driveway, past the gardens Helen insisted we pay someone else to maintain, past the fountain she commissioned for our 20th anniversary. I sat in the car, staring at the house I built in 1995, board by board, nail by nail, a love letter to the woman, now scheming to steal it. Inside, the silence felt hollow, not peaceful. I noticed things differently now. The wedding photo, the anniversary card, the baby pictures of Sophie. Every artifact of our life together was a prop in a play I hadn't known I was in. Had she loved me back then? Or had every smile, every "I love you" been part of a long game to drain me dry? I sat in the dark, surrounded by ghosts of memories I thought were real, and felt grief harden into strategy. Helen believed she was playing the long game, positioning herself for maximum financial gain while keeping just enough innocence to avoid suspicion. What she didn't realize was that her husband had the same strategic mind that built a construction empire from nothing. The rules of her game were about to change. The quiet in the living room pressed against me as I forced myself to think like the businessman I've always been. When had Helen shifted from genuine partner to calculated opportunist? The answer came with startling clarity. 2020, when Cole Construction landed the Morrison Municipal Center contract. $50 million over 3 years, the largest project in our history. I came home that night expecting celebration, maybe champagne, maybe even the warm pride she'd always shown before. Instead, Helen sat at the kitchen table with a real estate magazine and a calculator. "This means we can finally buy that house on Ridgewood Lane," she said without looking up. "The one with the fountain and the pool. They're asking $4.2 million. Not congratulations. Not, I'm proud of you. Just immediate fixation on what my work could buy her. Helen, I haven't even started the project yet. There's design work, permits, subcontract, and negotiations." "But the money is guaranteed, right?" she interrupted, finally glancing up, eyes sharp and calculating. That conversation lasted 2 hours. She'd already mapped out expenditures. The house, the country club membership, luxury cars, European vacations. Not our expenditures. Hers. I didn't notice then, but the pronouns told the real story. By 2021, her demands had grown sharper. The country club became non-negotiable when the Pattersons joined. Our cozy lake cabin became embarrassing compared to what the Johnsons owned. And somewhere along the way, physical intimacy faded into nothing. Separate bedrooms were suddenly necessary because of my snoring, something she'd never complained about in 23 years of marriage. Dinner conversations shifted to lists of what other women had. Sarah's husband bought her a Mercedes for their anniversary. Each story a jab dressed as casual conversation. Then came her new friendship with Mark Turner after our daughter Sophie's wedding in 2023. She became fascinated by property law, divorce settlements, and hypothetical cases. Phone calls sent her into another room under the excuse of book club or volunteer meetings. I replayed today's recording Mark's voice. We've been documenting his assets for months. Helen's laugh. 25 years of playing the devoted wife. She'd been collecting intel while I built the very empire she planned to take from me. But she made a fatal mistake, underestimating the man who built Cole Construction with one truck and a borrowed tool set. I walked into my home office. On the shelves, 35 years of business history. Tax returns, contracts, deeds. Everything she thought she'd been cataloging. But the real assets? Those were elsewhere. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Marcus Webb, my accountant, my friend, and the only person who knew about the perfectly legal offshore arrangements I'd set up years ago. It was time to make a call that would change everything. 3 days later, my office had transformed into a war room. Laptops glowed with bank statements, property records, and legal files. Yellow legal pads covered every inch of the desk, each page labeled assets, weaknesses, timeline, leverage. Marcus had been more helpful than I'd hoped. Those offshore accounts were invisible to anyone without forensic accounting skills. Helen had been cataloging the visible kingdom, while the crown jewels sat untouched in plain sight. But her credit card records told their own story. $47,000 in unauthorized transfers in 8 months, all funneling into a joint savings account I'd never opened. The beneficiary? David Thompson. They'd been working together financially long before the divorce scheme even began. Country club lunches, $300 spa days, designer clothes, all conveniently timed with her so-called book club meetings. Every expense was proof. She wasn't just planning for a divorce. She was already living her new life. The 8th out of 500 homed handbags Helen had bought last Tuesday carried its own bitter irony, considering she had complained about grocery prices just that morning. Mark Turner's vulnerabilities proved even more revealing. My contacts in construction industry had been generous with information about Davenport's most ambitious attorney. The man who planned to steal my fortune was drowning in debt. $180,000 in student loans, an $8,500 a month office lease chosen for image over prudence, and a reputation for cutting ethical corners when money got tight. Sharp lawyer. Jim Morrison from Morrison Concrete told me over coffee, but champagne tastes on a beer budget. He owes 3 of my subcontractors almost $25,000. Always says next week and then disappears. The State Bar Association site confirmed it. 2 dismissed complaints in the past year involving mishandled client funds. Dismissed, yes, but the documentation remained. In the legal world, even unfounded complaints left a stain. I leaned back in my leather chair, surveying 72 hours worth of intelligence. Helen and Mark had catastrophically underestimated me. They saw a trusting husband who worked long hours and rarely questioned household expenses. Not the analytical mind that had turned reconstruction from one truck into a $12 million operation. The phone rang. Sophie's name lit up the screen. "Hey, sweetheart." I kept my tone warm, normal. "How's your day going?" "Dad, I need to ask you something." Her voice had that careful neutrality she used with patience. "Is everything okay between you and Mom? There's this tension whenever I'm around both of you." My hand tightened on the phone. "How much did she know?" "What makes you ask?" "Little things. Mom seems stressed about money, which is strange since business has been so good. And Mark keeps asking weird questions about your company structure. Who controls what, how the partnerships work. It feels like they're fishing for information, but I can't figure out why. Fishing for information. My daughter's psychology training had picked up on predatory behavior Helen, and Mark thought they'd hidden. Probably just curiosity. I said carefully, "Your mom's always been interested in financial security." "Maybe." Sophie's tone said she wasn't convinced. "Dad, if something was really wrong, you'd tell me, right?" That question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Tell her that her mother was planning to destroy me? That her husband was orchestrating the whole thing? That her entire family life was built on lies? Of course, sweetheart. But everything's fine. Just the usual business pressures. After we hung up, I stared at my notes. Mark was pumping my daughter for details. Their intelligence gathering operation was wider than I'd thought. Time to make sure they got exactly the information I wanted them to have. My secure line rang. Sarah Chun, my accountant for 12 years. "Thomas, I've got the asset protection documents ready." When you mentioned updating estate planning, I dug into the best structures. This is about more than estate planning, isn't it? How perceptive of you. 28 years in forensic accounting teaches you to read between the lines. Domestic threat? Exactly. I'll have everything ready by noon. Once we're done, your business assets will be insulated from any personal legal action. Whoever's coming after you won't even see the real money. By 10 a.m., I was across from Tom Bradley, president of First National Bank, and my golf partner for 15 years. Account security review, I said, sliding him documents. Verify and temporarily freeze all joint access points until identity is confirmed. Tom's eyebrows rose. Every account? Credit lines? Payments? Every single one. This will inconvenience Helen significantly. I'm counting on it. By 11:47 a.m., the security holds were active. At 12:03, while Helen was settling into lunch at Riverside Country Club with 3 other construction wives, the first decline transaction hit. Her call came at 12:50. Thomas, something's wrong with our accounts. My car was declined at lunch, and the bank says there's a security hold. Do you know anything about this? Perfect innocence. No mention of the joint account with Mark's name. No acknowledgement of the missing $47,000. Security hold? That sounds serious. Did they say what triggered it? Something about verifying identity and access. It's embarrassing, Thomas. I'm here with Linda and Susan and Janet, and I can't even pay for my own lunch. The distress in her voice wasn't about the conspiracy being threatened. It was about her social standing taking a hit. After 25 years, I knew her priorities. I'll call Tom Bradley immediately, I said, but I didn't. Instead, I drove to the medical center site, where my crew was pouring foundations. The sounds of machinery and shouted instructions grounded me. My phone buzzed with Helen's texts all afternoon. 1:47 p.m. Still can't access any accounts. This is ridiculous. 2:23 p.m. Tom's secretary says he's in meetings all day. What kind of bank president ignores his best customers? 3:15 p.m. Even our emergency credit line was frozen. Helen Reed's text messages kept coming, sharp, urgent, and increasingly panicked. How am I supposed to buy groceries? She demanded. Each message brought me a certain grim satisfaction. For 25 years, Helen had lived with the assumption that money would always be there, no matter what. She never saw the 60-hour work weeks that kept it flowing as a sacrifice, only a certainty. Now, she was learning what it felt like when that certainty vanished overnight. Mark Turner's reaction? Even more fascinating. At 4:30 p.m., my private investigator, Mike Rodriguez, called with an update. Turner tried to get into his shared account with your wife 3 times a day. Mike said. When that didn't work, he went after what I'm guessing is Sophie Reed's education trust. That's locked down too, just like you told me. Mike described the scene. Angry phone calls to bank, threats of legal action, demands to talk to management. It was the sound of an overconfident lawyer realizing his influence had evaporated. By 6 p.m., I was in my home office reviewing the day's victories. Every shared account, frozen. Every joint credit line, suspended. Every automatic payment, blocked unless I approved it personally. Helen's access to 25 years of carefully built wealth had been reduced to whatever cash she happened to have in her purse. And it was all completely legal, standard protective measures while revisiting estate planning. Tom Bradley, my banker, could confirm every protocol was by the book, but Helen and Mark wouldn't hear bank policy. They'd hear the real message. The man they'd been planning to ambush wasn't on defense anymore. At 6:47 p.m., my phone lit up with Helen's number. This time, the voice on the other end was desperate, not manipulative. By 7:15 p.m., she was storming into Mark Turner's downtown office building. Mike, stationed across the street at a coffee shop, watched her heels hammer the marble lobby floor. The neighbor had overheard her urgent call in our driveway. Mark, we need to talk. Right now. Something's gone terribly wrong. On the 14th floor, the two of them huddled in his office. Piles of documents spread across the table. The tension in their body language was visible from the street. Mike's contact in a neighboring office, thanks to the old ventilation system, caught their conversation. Thomas knows something, Helen said, her voice tight. He's cutting us off completely. I couldn't even put gas in my car today. This isn't random, Mark replied. 3 days ago, you said he showed up at Sophie's house while we were talking about strategy. He must have overheard us. How much? Helen asked. Enough, Mark said. We have to assume he recorded everything. Assets, timelines, strategy. Silence followed. Two people realizing the man they'd underestimated had been several moves ahead all along. What do we do? Helen finally asked. We accelerate. Monday morning, I'm filing for an emergency divorce with immediate spousal support. We claim you're the victim of financial abuse. Helen hesitated. Financial abuse? Exactly. We spin it so he's a controlling husband who uses money to intimidate. Those frozen accounts? Evidence. You start writing down any time he makes a financial decision without asking you, questioning your spending, or influencing you with money. That's tricky. Thomas has never been controlling about money. If anything, he's been too generous. Then we call that manipulation. Mark said without missing a beat. Generosity is a tool to create dependency. Every gift becomes part of the case. Proof he kept you financially tied to him, so you couldn't leave. Helen was quiet. The idea was starting to take root. What about Sophie? She asked. She's not going to automatically take my side. Her psychology training makes her suspicious of everything. Mark's tone sharpened. Perfect. Her hesitation becomes proof of how thoroughly Thomas has manipulated family dynamics. We frame it as him using her training against you, turning his own daughter into a skeptic of her mother's emotional needs. You want to use Sophie as a witness against her father? I want to protect your financial future, Mark countered. And Sophie's professional credibility only makes her testimony more valuable. It was a chillingly methodical plan. Turn my daughter's professional instincts into a weapon, twist decades of love into accusations of abuse, and reframe my protective actions as evidence of control. By Wednesday, Mark promised, we'll have him painted as an abusive husband who needs court supervision. If he fights, we escalate. Harassment charges, stalking claims, emotional abuse. The beauty is, the more he denies it, the more guilty he looks. Helen laughed coldly. Poor Thomas. He has no idea what he started. Oh, but I did. And I was counting on them making their next move. This isn't some ordinary precaution. This is retaliation. Retaliation for what? Sophie Reed asked. Helen Reed hesitated, weighing how much she could admit without exposing the entire scheme. I think Thomas suspects I've been reevaluating our marriage. Maybe he's trying to scare me into staying. Mom. Sophie's voice was calm, but carried the steady patience of someone who dealt with manipulative clients before. Are you saying Dad is cutting off your access to money to stop you from leaving? Or are you saying you're considering divorce and he's safeguarding the finances? The way Sophie separated the two possibilities struck a little too close to reality. Helen shifted tactics. I'm saying your father's behavior lately has been concerning. As a psychologist, I thought you could give me insight into what's going on. As a psychologist, Sophie replied evenly, I'd say major changes in behavior usually have clear triggers. What happened 3 days ago that might have made Dad suddenly lock down the accounts? Helen's thoughts spun. Sophie wasn't the type to accept emotional appeals without proof. Every question chipped away at the image of a helpless victim Helen was trying to paint. I don't know what set him off, and that's what scares me. But Sophie was watching her with clinical detachment, analyzing her mother's tone and expressions like a professional. Mom, do you want my professional opinion, or do you want to take your side in a marital dispute? That blunt question shattered the strategy. Sophie wasn't going to hand her mother the emotional validation she wanted. I'm asking you to help me figure out what's happening to our family, Helen tried. Then I suggest you have a direct, honest conversation with Dad about his concerns, rather than asking me to diagnose him based on your interpretation, Sophie said firmly. Helen ended the call 20 minutes later, frustrated by her daughter's refusal to join the narrative and increasingly worried. If Sophie wouldn't back her story without evidence, the entire victim angle would collapse under scrutiny. Meanwhile, across town at Cole Construction's headquarters, I was about to receive intel that could change everything. At 10:15 a.m., Jim Morrison called just as I was scanning weekend job site reports. Thomas, you might want to hear this. Mark Turner's in trouble with the State Bar Association. They're investigating how he handled contractor payments on the Mitchell job. What kind of trouble? I asked. 3 subcontractors filed complaints last month. He got paid by the client, but never passed the money on to the trades. That's a classic trust account violation. If they can prove it, I set my coffee down, already calculating the fallout. How bad? Bad enough they've scheduled a hearing next week. Mark's scrambling to find 23 grand to settle up before they rule. 23,000. The exact number I knew from my own digging. Jim, think those contractors would be willing to talk if someone in construction reached out? Absolutely. They're furious. He's been stalling them for months. Always an excuse. Always someone else's fault. These are small operators. They can't afford to eat those losses. Over the next 3 hours, I made a few well-placed calls. Bob Martinez from Martinez Electrical, waiting 8 months for $7,400. Steve Chun from Chun Plumbing, owed $9,200 since last October. Randy Foster from Foster Roofing, still missing $6,500 from work finished in November. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Me checking references before hiring Mark, and them unloading about his ethics, his shortcuts, and his habit of treating client funds like his personal wallet. By 1 p.m., I had everything I needed: dates, amounts, witnesses, enough to show a clear pattern of misconduct. At 2:30, I called the State Bar's ethics complaint line. I'd like to report an attorney for trust account violations, I told the intake officer. I handed over every detail: names, amounts, timelines, and 3 contractors willing to testify. By 4 p.m., the Bar Association was calling Mark's office with urgent hearing notices and document requests. His professional reputation, the very weapon he'd been using against me, was now under attack. At 4:47 p.m., Mike Rodriguez texted. Turner just left the office with 3 boxes of files. Heading to his car. Want me to follow? No need. I typed back. I already know where he's going. Mark wouldn't be able to resist rushing to Helen Reed. Panic makes people predictable, and a conspiracy that had started so carefully was about to dissolve into chaos. 2 days of Mark's professional meltdown had given Sophie Reed time to process everything. Driving to Cole Construction felt like walking toward a long-delayed confrontation. Sarah, my secretary of 8 years, greeted her warmly. He's expecting you, sweetheart. Go right in. He's expecting you, sweetheart. Go right in. I stood when she walked in, reading her posture, like I'd learned to read Helen's over 25 years. But Sophie moved differently now. Professional, steady, a little distant. Dad, we need to talk about you and Mom, she began, her voice neutral, like she was speaking to a patient. I've spent the last 2 days analyzing everything, and I want to understand your side. What's your mother tell you? I asked. That you're controlling the money, manipulating her emotionally, maybe even abusing her. She folded her hands in front of her. She wants me to use my credentials to support her story. The clinical language was jarring coming from my daughter, but I understood the tactic. Sophie Reed was creating emotional distance so she could evaluate the facts like a professional. And what do you think? I asked. I think Mom tried to manipulate me the same way she's been trying to manipulate you. Sophie replied, her green eyes, so much like Helen Reed's, but clearer, fixed on mine. Show me the evidence, Dad. I need to hear what you heard. I hesitated. Once I played that recording, there'd be no protecting her from the truth about her mother and Mark Turner. But Sophie was 30 years old, a licensed psychologist, and fully capable of handling reality. I pressed play on my phone. Helen's voice filled my office. When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for. For the first minute, Sophie's expression stayed neutral, professional detachment in full force. She listened as her mother mocked 25 years of marriage, heard Mark mapping out legal strategies for maximum financial damage, and absorbed their cold calculations about timelines and asset division. But when Helen said 25 years of playing the devoted wife, Sophie's hands clenched for just a moment before she released them. How long have you known? She asked. 6 days, I told her. I overheard it at your house last Tuesday. And since then, building a defense strategy, while pretending everything was normal, I admitted. She leaned back, processing. Mom asked me to evaluate your mental state. She wanted me to give professional opinion that you were exhibiting abusive patterns. And what did you tell her? That I couldn't ethically assess you without proper evaluation, and that her claims didn't match your established behavioral patterns. Sophie's voice hardened. She tried to use my training as a weapon, Dad, against you and against professional ethics. The weight of betrayal hung in the room, hers and mine. I'm sorry you've been dragged into this, sweetheart. I'm not, she said sharply. I'm glad I know the truth. The question is, what happens now? That's your choice, Sophie. I won't ask you to pick sides. I already have. She stood, decision made. I choose truth over family loyalty, evidence over emotion, and I choose to support the parent who didn't try to manipulate my ethics. Relief washed through me, followed by concern. What about Mark? Her voice went cold. My husband conspired to financially destroy my father while using my career as cover. That marriage is over. And I'm not saying this in anger. I'm saying it based on character and evidence. She paused at the door. I'll testify honestly if needed, but I won't be anyone's weapon, not even yours. I understand. Good, because there's one more thing I need to do. She walked out with the purposeful stride of someone who had found moral clarity in a situation designed to erase it. 20 minutes later, Sophie would be unlocking the door to confront the man who betrayed not only her family, but her professional integrity. At 7:30 p.m., her key turned in the lock. Mark looked up, startled, clearly not expecting her home early. Legal documents were spread across the coffee table, whiskey glass half empty beside him. We need to talk, she said, setting her purse down with precision. Rough day, he muttered without looking up. The Barrett deposition got postponed. I know about the conspiracy, Mark. His head snapped up, the polished lawyer mask slipping to reveal desperation. What conspiracy? The one where you and my mother planned to destroy my father financially while using my credentials to back false abuse claims. I heard the recording. Every word. Bree, he stopped himself. Sophie, you're misunderstanding. 25 years of playing the devoted wife, she interrupted. The color drained from his face. How much did you hear? Everything. The asset division strategy. Your fee calculations. Mom's little performance reviews. She sat across from him, her tone clinical. Was our entire marriage part of this plan? 3 days later, Helen Reed discovered that social destruction moves faster than legal proceedings. At the Riverside Country Club Saturday brunch, clusters of women stopped their conversations when she approached. Friends avoided her eyes, claimed sudden phone calls, or simply turned away. Invitations dried up. By the time she reached her usual table, the message was clear. Her social standing had been quietly erased. Meanwhile, I was working on my own campaign. Decades of honest work had earned me credibility no court filing could touch. Over lunch with Tom Bradley from the bank, I shared just enough about family difficulties to establish the facts without seeming vindictive. The Chamber of Commerce meeting that night was similar. Genuine disappointment in my voice as I spoke of discovering that some people aren't who you thought they were. By Sunday night, Helen's isolation was complete. Even the country club membership committee scheduled a routine review of her status. The charity board accepted Helen Reed's resignation from positions she never actually submitted. Meanwhile, Mark Turner's professional downfall raced right alongside Helen's social collapse. 3 of his biggest clients walked away, citing concerns about judgment and ethical standards. The Miller Industries account, worth a staggering $200,000 a year, sent a formal letter saying they'd lost confidence in his professional discretion. Helen's frantic Sunday night call to Mark carried a kind of desperation that even the thin walls of their apartment couldn't muffle. Everyone knows, Mark. Everyone. I can't show my face anywhere in this town. We'll file emergency motions Monday morning, he said quickly, and force Thomas into a defensive position. Before what? She shot back. Before you lose your law license? Before I move back to my sister's place in Minnesota? The 2 of them kept at it until midnight, 2 conspirators realizing that sharing guilt is nothing like sharing solutions. Tomorrow, they'd roll the dice on one last desperate move. I was ready for them. Monday morning, Helen walked into Linda Hawthorne's downtown office, a divorce attorney known for scorched earth tactics and equally scorching legal fees. From the glass-walled conference room, she could see the courthouse where she hoped to ruin me. But Linda's expression told me her optimism was already wearing thin. "Mrs. Reed," Linda said after reviewing the file, "your husband's financial protections appear legally sound. Joint account holders do have the right to restrict access during marital conflict. But it's financial abuse," Helen insisted, letting desperation slip into her voice. "He's controlling every aspect of my access to money we earn together." "Money he earned," Linda corrected gently, "according to 25 years of tax records. Your income contribution appears minimal. You haven't been employed outside the home since 1989. Helen flushed. Being a homemaker had once been her badge of comfort and stability. Now, it was proof of dependency. "What about emotional abuse?" "Intimidation?" She tried again. "What specific incidents can you document?" That question hung in the air. Helen had spent sleepless nights trying to fabricate a believable abuse pattern from 25 years of my genuine consideration and generosity. "He's always been controlling about money," she said weakly. "Can you provide examples of threats? Physical intimidation? Isolation from family or friends?" "Well, no, but—" "Mrs. Reed," Linda said firmly, "domestic abuse cases require evidence. Has he ever threatened you physically, kept you from leaving the house, or monitored your communications?" Every question punched holes in Helen's false narrative. The truth was simple. I'd never once raised my voice in anger, never restricted her movements, never questioned her friendships. Meanwhile, 10 blocks away, Mark Turner was discovering that the Bar Association could move very quickly when they wanted answers. "Mr. Turner," the ethics committee rep said over phone, "we've received additional complaints about your handling of client trust accounts. Specifically, allegations you've been using client funds for personal expenses." Mark's grip tightened on the phone. "Those are unfounded. I've always kept proper accounting. We have invoices from Martinez Electrical showing bills submitted 8 months ago, with promises of payment pending client approval. But your client settled 6 months ago. Where are those funds now?" The answer? His personal checking account, where he'd been shuffling money to cover office rent and student loans. What he considered clever cash flow management now looked an awful lot like embezzlement. There may have been administrative delays. "Mr. Turner, a formal hearing is scheduled for Thursday morning. Bring complete financial records for all client accounts from the past 18 months. By Wednesday night, Helen and Mark were out of options. They met in Mark's nearly empty office, like generals planning one last doomed assault. "We have to file domestic violence claims," Helen said with false confidence. "It's the only way to force him into a defensive position." "Helen, false domestic violence claims are a felony, especially if Thomas has the kind of evidence I think he does." "What evidence?" she said, then froze. "The recording. The one that started this whole unraveling. That recording shows we were discussing financial plans, not abuse," Mark reminded her. "So, we reframe it. Your legal expertise, my victim testimony. We make it about long-term emotional manipulation and financial control." Mark stared at her. 6 months ago, she'd been a restless housewife craving excitement. Now she was proposing perjury in federal court. "If this fails, we're both going to prison. If we don't try, I end up broke and you end up disbarred," she shot back. "At least this way, we go down swinging." Thursday morning, the restraining order hearing. The Davenport County Courthouse carried a certain weight that day. 35 years of my honest reputation felt like armor. Judge Patricia Hendricks ran her courtroom with brisk efficiency. Helen sat at the plaintiff's table in her battered wife uniform. Conservative dress, minimal makeup, her hands folded just so. "Mrs. Reed," the judge began, "you allege your husband has engaged in financial abuse and intimidation. Can you describe specific incidents that led you to fear for your safety?" Helen's voice trembled just enough. "For months, my husband has restricted my access to our accounts, monitored my spending, and made threats about what would happen if I tried to leave." "What kind of threats, Mrs. Reed?" "Financial threats. That I'd be left with nothing. That he'd use his business connections to destroy my reputation." I stopped there, knowing the truth and my evidence, was about to turn their final play into their final mistake. Helen paused for effect. Last week, he completely cut off my access to money, even for basic necessities. I sat there, watching my wife of 25 years grow bolder with each falsehood. Every lie stacked neatly on the last, building a fictional portrait of abuse from a man who'd spent decades giving her every comfort she demanded. Judge Hendricks turned to my attorney, James Morrison. Does the defendant wish to respond? James stood with the calm authority that comes from 3 decades of practicing law without ever encouraging a client to lie. Your Honor, we have evidence that Mrs. Reed's claims are not only false, but part of a deliberate conspiracy to defraud my client of marital assets. That's a serious allegation, Counselor. We have an audio recording of Mrs. Reed and her co-conspirator, Mark Turner, planning this exact scenario 6 weeks ago. Helen's face was drained of color. Linda Hawthorne leaned toward her, whispering frantically, "But there's no damage control when your whole case is built on lies. I'd like to present Exhibit A." James continued, plugging his phone into the courtroom audio system. Helen's voice filled the chamber. "When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for." For 43 minutes, the judge listened to the entire conspiracy unfold. Helen mocking our marriage, Mark laying out legal strategies to grab assets, the two of them scheming to exploit Sophie's credentials in psychology. "The man actually believes I love him," Helen's recorded voice said, dripping with casual cruelty. I watched her carefully crafted victim persona crumble in real time. Her coached testimony about fearing for her safety looked ridiculous when played next to her laughter about manipulating the old fool. Judge Hendricks finally stopped the recording. "Mrs. Reed, do you have any response to this evidence?" Helen opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Linda Hawthorne's face was pale. She addressed the bench carefully. "Your Honor, I request permission to withdraw from this case. I was not informed of these circumstances when I agreed to representation." Motion granted. The judge fixed Helen with the kind of stare she usually saved for people caught lying under oath. "Mrs. Reed, I'm dismissing your restraining order petition with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation of possible perjury charges." The gavel struck with a finality that echoed through the courtroom. 2 weeks later, the divorce settlement reflected Helen's spectacular miscalculation. Her documented lies eliminated any claim to spousal support, and the prenuptial agreement she'd signed eagerly back in 1997 limited her to a minimal share of assets. Mark Turner's law license suspension became permanent revocation after the bar uncovered $127,000 in missing client funds. Last I heard, he'd moved to Nebraska and was working as a paralegal. Sophie filed for divorce the day after the hearing, citing irreconcilable differences. She's now building a new therapy practice specializing in identifying manipulation patterns. 6 months later, Helen's working retail at the same mall where she once spent my money on luxury goods. The irony isn't lost on either of us. As for me, Thomas Reed, I rebuilt my construction company's reputation stronger than ever. The community support during my family ordeal translated into new contracts and deeper trust. The house feels different now, quieter but honest. No more staged affection. No more calculated small talk. Just the sound of rain on windows I built with my own hands in a home that's finally mine again. Helen had been right about one thing. I really had believed she loved me. Now I know the difference between love and performance. If this story touched your heart, give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done?